Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that might lull you into the deepest sleep of your life. The utterly bone-chilling reality of surviving on a 1980s North Sea oil rig. We're diving into what life was really like for the thousands of men who risked everything in one of the most dangerous industrial environments ever created. Forget the glamorous oil baron stories Hollywood sold you. Those were about the executives sitting in comfortable offices, while everyone else faced conditions that would make Antarctic explorers quit their jobs and become librarians. The truth is, if you were dropped onto a North Sea oil rig in 1985, you probably wouldn't survive your first shift, let alone make it through a full rotation. You'd be crushed, frozen, or drowned faster than oil prices collapsed in the 80s. And believe me, that happened pretty fast when everyone realized there was more crude floating around than anyone knew what to do with. So before you get comfortable in your modern bed with its miracle of temperature control and structural integrity that doesn't depend on welding done during a hurricane, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world as we explore the lives of people who worked in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by water that could kill you in minutes and machinery that could kill you in seconds. Because GPS existed, but good luck using it when your helicopter can't fly in weather that would make penguins complain about the cold. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on that fan for some soft background noise, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. A journey through steel, ice, and the kind of industrial nightmare that makes your worst Monday morning look like a spa day hosted by someone who actually cares about your well-being. You wake up at 4 in the morning to the sound of metal groaning, not the gentle creaking of an old house settling. The violent, terrifying sound of a 100-foot steel structure being battered by waves the size of apartment buildings. You're 200 miles from the nearest land. The North Sea stretches in every direction like a grey, angry beast that's been waiting decades for someone exactly like you to make one tiny mistake. Your bunk is barely wider than a coffin, which is fitting because that's essentially what it might become if things go wrong. The walls are thin steel plates that conduct cold like they're specifically designed to freeze your bones. There's no insulation worth mentioning. Just you, a thin blanket, and the constant reminder that you're essentially living inside a metal can floating on top of one of the most hostile bodies of water on Earth. The alarm clock next to your head sounds like an air raid siren, because on an oil rig, gentle wake-up calls are a luxury nobody can afford. Every second counts when you're dealing with equipment that could explode, catch fire, or simply decide to malfunction in ways that would impress professional demolition experts. You stumble out of your bunk, feet hitting the cold metal floor with a shock that travels straight up your spine. Your roommate, a guy named Magnus from Aberdeen, is already pulling on his coveralls. He's been doing this for 8 years, which, in oil rig terms, makes him ancient. Most guys don't last more than 2 or 3 rotations before they realize they'd rather work literally anywhere else on the planet, including places where people actively shoot at each other for fun. Morning sunshine, Magnus says, his Scottish accent thick as North Sea crude. Hope you slept well, because today we're working on the drill floor, and the weather report says we're getting 30-foot swells. 30-foot swells? In case you're wondering, that means waves tall enough to look down at a 3-story building. Waves that hit the rig's support legs with the force of freight trains driven by angry gods who specifically hate oil workers. You're about to spend your day working with heavy machinery while standing on a platform that's essentially being used as a punching bag by the ocean. You stumble to the mess hall, which is what they generously call the eating area. It's a room barely large enough for 20 people, with tables bolted to the floor and chairs that are welded in place. Because when your dining room is constantly moving in 3 dimensions, furniture that can slide around becomes furniture that can kill people. The cooks, bless their hearts, are trying to serve breakfast while the entire rig tilts back and forth like a carnival ride, designed by someone with a grudge against human equilibrium. "What's for breakfast?" you ask Tommy, the cook who's been on this rig longer than anyone can remember. He's got the thousand-yard stare of someone who's seen too many emergency evacuations and not enough dry land. Same as always, Tommy says, sliding a plate across the table. Beans, eggs, and bacon. All of it cooked while standing on a surface that won't stay level for more than 10 seconds at a time. The eggs are somehow both overcooked and undercooked simultaneously. The bacon has achieved a texture that doesn't exist in nature. The beans taste like they were prepared by someone who learned cooking from a manual written by people who had never actually seen food before. But you eat it anyway, because you'll need every calorie you can get for what's coming next. "First time on the drill floor?" asks Jake, a roughneck from Texas who moved to the North Sea because apparently regular oil work wasn't dangerous enough for him. He's missing 2 fingers from his left hand. Not from a dramatic accident, just routine equipment maintenance that went slightly wrong. Which, on an oil rig, is like saying the Titanic had a minor navigation error. "Yeah," you reply, trying to keep your voice steady as the rig lurches to one side. "How bad is it?" Jake laughs. It's not a reassuring laugh. It's the laugh of someone who's about to watch another person discover exactly how many ways there are to die while drilling for oil in the middle of a hostile ocean. "Bad?" Jake repeats. "Kid, bad is when the coffee runs out. What we're doing today is something else entirely. We're working with equipment that weighs more than most buildings, powered by enough energy to light up a small city, while standing on a platform that's being beaten to death by waves that could crush cars. And we're doing it in weather that would make Arctic explorers file complaints with their union." You finish your breakfast in silence, listening to the constant background noise of the rig. It's not just one sound. It's a symphony of industrial terror. Engines rumbling, pumps cycling, metal flexing, water crashing. And underneath it all, the subtle but unmistakable sound of a massive structure trying not to fall apart while being systematically destroyed by forces beyond human control. The safety briefing happens in what they call the tool pusher's office, which is generous because it's essentially a closet with a desk and enough safety equipment to make everyone feel slightly less likely to die horribly. The tool pusher, a weathered man named Bill, who's been working oil rigs since before you were born, goes through the daily safety checklist with the enthusiasm of someone reading obituaries. "Right then," Bill begins, his Yorkshire accent making everything sound simultaneously comforting and ominous. "Today we're running pipe while dealing with weather that would make Noah rethink his career choices. Visibility is down to about 50 feet. The deck is covered in ice that's slicker than whatever politicians use for hair gel. And the crane operators are working in winds that could blow a grown man off the rig like a leaf." He pauses to look around the room. Everyone's faces have that special expression people get when they're about to do something that violates every instinct for self-preservation they've ever had. "Questions?" Bill asks. Nobody has questions. Not because everything is clear, but because everyone knows the only real question is, why are we doing this, and nobody wants to hear the answer. Which is, because somebody in London thinks there's money to be made, and you're the expendable labour force that's going to make it happen. You suit up in the gear room, which is where they keep all the equipment designed to keep oil workers alive just long enough to extract more oil. Your survival suit is bright orange, supposedly waterproof, and theoretically capable of keeping you alive if you end up in the North Sea. The theory breaks down when you realise that North Sea water in January is cold enough to stop your heart in less than 5 minutes, and the suit is only rated to keep you alive for 15 minutes, assuming you don't panic, don't get injured, and don't encounter any of the 1,000 other things that can go wrong when you're floating in an ocean that's actively trying to kill you. "Snug fit?" asks Dave, the safety officer who hands out equipment with the grim efficiency of someone distributing parachutes on a crashing airplane. Dave's been on oil rigs for 15 years, which is roughly equivalent to serving multiple life sentences in conditions that would make prison wardens quit their jobs and become elementary school teachers. "It feels like wearing a refrigerator," you reply, trying to move your arms in the bulky suit. "Good," Dave says. "That means it might actually work if you end up in the water. Might be the operative word. Because if you go over the side, your biggest problem won't be the cold. It'll be the fact that you're attached to a 100,000-ton structure that's anchored to the sea floor and isn't going anywhere to pick you up. The drill floor is where the magic happens. And by magic, I mean the process of using industrial equipment to bore holes through the Earth's crust while standing on a platform that's constantly moving in ways that make carnival rides look stable. The drill floor is about the size of a basketball court, covered in machinery that weighs more than most office buildings and operated by people who have to coordinate their movements with the precision of ballet dancers, except ballet dancers don't usually work with equipment that can cut through steel like butter. Your job, as the new guy, is to help handle the drill pipe. Each section weighs about 600 pounds and is 30 feet long. You'll be guiding these sections into position while the rig rocks back and forth like a giant's cradle. The experienced crew makes it look easy, which is how you know it's actually impossible. "Watch the pipe," shouts Red, the driller who's been running drill floors since the North Sea oil boom began. Red got his name from his hair colour, which turned red from stress sometime during his second year on the rigs. She's got a mind of her own when the rig's moving like this. The pipe does indeed seem to have a mind of its own, and that mind appears to be filled with homicidal intentions toward anyone stupid enough to work on an oil rig. As the rig tilts to port, the pipe swings toward the starboard side, with enough force to crush anyone who happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, which, given how often the rig changes direction, is essentially everywhere at all times. "New guy," Red shouts over the noise of the drilling equipment. "Come here and help Jimmy with the slips." The slips are the devices that hold the drill pipe in place, while sections are added or removed. They look simple enough. Just metal wedges that grip the pipe and keep it from falling down the hole. Of course, simple doesn't mean safe. Nothing on an oil rig is safe. The slips are designed to hold pipes that weigh thousands of pounds, which means they can easily crush human bones like breadsticks. Jimmy, who's been working drill floors for 6 years, shows you how to operate the slips. He's got the patience of someone who knows that training new workers properly is the difference between going home with all your fingers and going home with medical bills that would bankrupt small countries. "See this lever?" Jimmy says, pointing to a steel handle that's been worn smooth by thousands of operations. "Pull it this way to engage the slips. Push it that way to release them. Simple, right?" It's not simple. Nothing involving heavy machinery operated by people standing on a moving platform while being battered by weather that would make meteorologists cry is simple. But Jimmy makes it look simple, which is why he's survived 6 years in a job where the average career length is measured in months. The first pipe section goes smoothly. The crew coordinates their movements with the unconscious precision of people who've done this exact operation thousands of times. The pipe swings into position. The slips engage. The connection is made. Everything works exactly as designed. The second pipe section tries to kill everyone. As the rig lurches to starboard, the 600-pound section of steel pipe decides to become a wrecking ball. It swings across the drill floor with the inevitability of gravity and the destructive power of a medieval siege weapon. Everyone scatters like oil workers fleeing from a safety inspector, except there's nowhere to run because you're on a platform in the middle of the ocean. "Look out!" someone shouts, which is helpful advice, except looking out doesn't actually stop 600 pounds of steel from obeying the laws of physics. Red manages to catch the pipe with the drawworks, which is the winch system that raises and lowers the drilling equipment. The pipe jerks to a stop 3 feet from where you're standing, close enough that you can feel the wind from its passage. Close enough that you realize exactly how many ways you can die on an oil rig without even trying. "Welcome to the North Sea," Red says, grinning with the manic joy of someone who's survived another near-death experience. "She's a beautiful lady, but she'll kill you if you don't show her proper respect." You spend the next 6 hours learning to show the North Sea proper respect, which mostly involves staying constantly alert for the dozens of ways that routine operations can suddenly become fatal accidents. The drill pipe that's swinging toward your head. The deck that's covered in ice, slick enough to make walking impossible. The equipment that's operating at pressures high enough to cut through human bodies like industrial water cutters. Lunch happens in shifts because somebody has to keep operating the equipment at all times. Oil rigs don't get lunch breaks. They get brief periods where slightly fewer people are actively risking their lives, but the machinery keeps running, and the ocean keeps trying to destroy everything humans have built. You sit in the mess hall with Magnus and Jake, eating sandwiches that somehow taste like diesel fuel and salt water. The conversation revolves around the weather forecast, which is the closest thing to entertainment available on an oil rig. The weather forecast is also the closest thing to a death sentence, because weather in the North Sea doesn't just make life uncomfortable, it makes life impossible. "Storm coming in tomorrow," Magnus says, consulting a weather report that looks like it was written by someone with a personal vendetta against oil workers. 40-foot swells, 60-mile-per-hour winds, horizontal rain. Horizontal rain. That's when the weather is so bad and stops falling down and starts flying sideways with enough force to strip paint off metal surfaces. Working in horizontal rain is like trying to perform surgery while being pelted with ice cubes thrown by professional baseball players. "We shutting down?" Jake asks, knowing the answer, but hoping someone will surprise him with good news for once. "Course not," Magnus replies. "Management says the schedule's too tight. We keep drilling unless the weather gets really bad." Really bad. On a North Sea oil rig, really bad weather is when the waves are tall enough to be visible from space and the wind is strong enough to relocate small buildings. Regular bad weather, like the kind that would shut down entire cities, is just Tuesday on an oil rig. After lunch, you're assigned to help with equipment maintenance, which sounds safer than working on the drill floor until you realize that maintaining equipment on an oil rig is like performing open-heart surgery on a patient who's currently being electrocuted while riding a roller coaster during an earthquake. Your supervisor is a mechanic named Olaf, who came to the North Sea from Norway because apparently regular mechanical work wasn't challenging enough. Olaf has the kind of practical knowledge that comes from spending years fixing things that were designed to work in controlled environments while actually operating in conditions that would make industrial engineers have nervous breakdowns. "Today, we're changing the mud pumps," Olaf says, leading you to a piece of equipment that looks like it was designed by engineers who were specifically trying to create the most dangerous possible way to move drilling fluid. Simple job. Just have to swap out components that weigh more than cars while working with pressurized systems that could launch a human body into orbit if something goes wrong. The mud pumps are responsible for circulating drilling fluid down the hole and back up to the surface. They operate at pressures that would make hydraulic engineers wake up in cold sweats. The drilling mud itself is a toxic mixture of chemicals designed to lubricate the drill bit and carry rock cuttings to the surface. It's also dense enough to crush human bones and caustic enough to dissolve most organic materials, including the organic materials that make up human bodies. "Safety first," Olaf says, handing you a wrench that weighs about 15 pounds. Never stand directly in line with a pressurized connection. If a fitting fails, you want the fluid to shoot past you, not through you. You spend the afternoon learning to maintain equipment that's designed to operate under conditions that would destroy most machinery. The mud pumps run continuously, because stopping them would mean losing circulation down the hole, which could lead to a blowout, which could lead to an explosion, which could lead to everyone on the rig dying in ways that would make action movie deaths look peaceful. Every component has to be maintained while the system is running, which means working around machinery that's operating at full capacity while being constantly battered by environmental conditions that would shut down most industrial operations. It's like trying to repair a race car while it's still racing, except the race car is also on fire and the racetrack is trying to collapse. Pressure gauge is reading high, Olaf observes, tapping a dial that's showing numbers in the red zone. Probably just a calibration issue, but we should check the relief valve just to be safe. Just to be safe. On an oil rig, just taking precautions that would be considered extreme paranoia in any other industry. Because on an oil rig, the difference between probably fine and everyone dies horribly is usually about one failed component or one moment of inattention. The relief valve is located in a position that requires crawling under the mud pump while it's operating at full capacity. which means putting your body directly underneath several thousand pounds of machinery that's vibrating hard enough to blur your vision, while working with tools that could conduct enough electricity to stop your heart if you touch the wrong component. "I'll hold the flashlight," Olaf says, which is his way of telling you that you're the one crawling under the death machine. "Just remember to keep your head down and don't touch anything that looks like it might be electrified." Everything looks like it might be electrified. Oil rigs use enough electricity to power small cities, and most of that electricity runs through cables and connections that weren't designed to operate in environments where saltwater spray covers everything, and the temperature fluctuates between freezing and slightly less freezing depending on the weather. You crawl under the mud pump, flashlight in one hand and wrench in the other, trying not to think about what would happen if the pump mounting brackets decided to fail while you're underneath them. The relief valve is exactly where Olaf said it would be, which is in the most inconvenient and dangerous possible location. "Valve looks fine," you shout over the noise of the machinery, which is good, because if the valve had been damaged, fixing it would have required shutting down the entire drilling operation, which would have required evacuating the rig, which would have required weather conditions that actually allowed helicopters to fly. And weather conditions on the North Sea that allow helicopters to fly happen about as often as solar eclipses. Dinner is served at 6 o'clock, which is arbitrary because on an oil rig, time is measured by work shifts rather than the position of the sun. The sun, assuming it's actually visible through the clouds and rain and snow, sets at different times depending on the season, but the work schedule remains constant. 12 hours on, 12 hours off, for 14-day rotations that feel like they last approximately 73 years each. The evening meal is prepared by Tommy, who somehow managed to create food that tastes exactly like what you'd expect if you asked someone to prepare dinner while standing on a ship during a storm using ingredients that were selected by people who had never actually tasted food before. The beef is tough enough to be used as construction material. The potatoes have achieved a texture that doesn't occur naturally. The vegetables look like they were grown in soil composed entirely of industrial lubricants. "How's the new guy doing?" Tommy asks Magnus, as if you're not sitting right there eating food that could be used to test military equipment for durability. "Still breathing," Magnus replies, which puts him ahead of about half the people who try this job. Still breathing. That's the standard for success on a North Sea oil rig. Not thriving, not enjoying the work, not building a meaningful career, just continuing to exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide, while surrounded by industrial equipment that's designed to extract petroleum from beneath the ocean floor, regardless of how many human lives it costs. After dinner, you have a few hours of free time before your next shift. Free time on an oil rig consists of reading books that other people left behind, playing cards with people who are too tired to concentrate properly, or staring out the windows at an ocean that stretches to the horizon in every direction, like a liquid desert populated entirely by things that want to kill you. You end up in the recreation room, which is a generous name for a space barely large enough for a ping-pong table and a television that receives exactly 2 channels when the weather isn't interfering with the satellite reception. The television is currently showing a nature documentary about penguins, which seems appropriate because penguins live in conditions that are only slightly more hostile than working on a North Sea oil rig. "Penguins have it easy," observes Charlie, an electrician from Liverpool who's been working oil rigs for 9 years. "They just have to worry about leopard seals and killer whales. We've got to worry about leopard seals, killer whales, and heavy machinery operated by people who haven't slept properly in weeks." Charlie's got a point. Penguins face natural predators and harsh environmental conditions, but they don't have to operate complex industrial equipment while standing on platforms that are constantly moving in 3 dimensions. They don't have to maintain electrical systems that could electrocute them while being sprayed with salt water that conducts electricity better than most metals. "At least penguins get to dive underwater when they want to," adds Steve, a welder who came to the North Sea because regular welding jobs didn't provide enough opportunities to risk 3rd-degree burns while working in sub-freezing temperatures. "We go underwater, we're dead in 5 minutes. The North Sea in winter is cold enough to stop human hearts, not gradually, like hypothermia, in movies where people slowly get sleepy and peaceful. Instantly, like jumping into liquid nitrogen while wearing a swimsuit. The shock of hitting water that's barely above freezing is enough to cause cardiac arrest in healthy adults. The cold penetrates survival suits within minutes, despite manufacturers' claims about thermal protection. You spend your free time writing a letter to your family, explaining what life is like on an oil rig without actually telling them anything that would make them worry. Which means leaving out most of the details about your daily routine, because describing your actual working conditions would make them think you'd joined some kind of industrial death cult. Having a great time, you write, which is technically true if you define great time as haven't died yet despite working in conditions that would make safety inspectors have nervous breakdowns. The work is challenging, and the people are friendly. The people are friendly, mostly because everyone on an oil rig understands that they're all in the same situation. Everyone is risking their lives to extract petroleum from beneath one of the most hostile bodies of water on Earth. Everyone is far from home, working shifts that would be illegal in most industries, operating equipment that could kill them if they make a single mistake. Friendship on an oil rig isn't a social choice. It's a survival strategy. Your second day starts at 4 in the morning with an alarm that sounds like the end of the world, which is appropriate because your second day on a North Sea oil rig might actually be the end of your world if you're not careful. The storm that Magnus mentioned during lunch has arrived, and it's brought weather conditions that would make Arctic explorers request transfers to more comfortable assignments. The waves are now 40 feet tall, which means they're roughly the same height as a 4-story building. Except buildings don't move, and these waves are moving at about 30 miles per hour, which is fast enough to make them essentially unstoppable by anything humans have built. The oil rig's support legs are engineered to withstand wave forces, but engineering calculations are based on theoretical conditions, and the North Sea doesn't always respect theoretical conditions. Rough night, Magnus observes, as you both struggle to get dressed while the entire rig tilts back and forth like a carnival ride operated by someone with a grudge against human equilibrium. Winds picked up to about 70 miles per hour. Visibility's down to maybe 20 feet. 70-mile-per-hour winds. That's hurricane force wind, the kind that knocks down trees and destroys buildings that aren't specifically designed to withstand extreme weather conditions. On an oil rig, hurricane force wind is just Tuesday, with slightly worse working conditions than usual. Breakfast is an adventure in applied physics. The mess hall tables are bolted to the floor, but the food isn't bolted to the tables. Every time the rig tilts, plates slide across tables like hockey pucks, spilling their contents onto surfaces that are already slick with saltwater spray that somehow manages to penetrate the supposedly watertight dining area. Storm should pass by tomorrow, Tommy says optimistically, as he tries to serve scrambled eggs while standing on a surface that won't stay level for more than 3 seconds at a time. Of course, there's another storm coming in behind this one, and another one behind that one. Winter storms in the North Sea don't come individually. They come in series, like waves of enemy attacks designed by meteorologists who specifically hate oil workers. Each storm brings its own combination of wind, rain, snow, and oceanic violence that would shut down most industrial operations. But oil rigs don't shut down. They keep drilling, because stopping would mean losing money, and oil companies would rather lose workers than lose money. The safety briefing takes place in conditions that would make the briefing itself a safety hazard under normal circumstances. Bill, the tool pusher, has to shout over the sound of wind that's strong enough to make the rig's superstructure vibrate like a tuning fork. "Weather's a bit rough today," Bill announces, with the understatement skills of someone describing the Titanic disaster as a minor shipping incident. "We're going to continue operations, but with extra safety precautions. Extra safety precautions on an oil rig means acknowledging that the work is even more likely to kill you than usual, but doing it anyway because the drilling schedule doesn't account for weather conditions that would shut down entire cities. Extra safety precautions means wearing additional safety equipment that might keep you alive an extra 30 seconds if something goes catastrophically wrong. Anyone who's not comfortable working in these conditions can request to be relieved of duty, Bill continues. This is a generous offer, except being relieved of duty on an oil rig in the middle of a storm means sitting in your bunk, listening to the rig being systematically destroyed by weather, while wondering if the structure will hold together long enough for the storm to pass. Nobody requests to be relieved of duty. Not because everyone's comfortable with the working conditions, but because everyone understands that oil rigs are staffed with exactly enough people to operate safely under ideal conditions. In storm conditions, every person is essential for keeping the rig operational and preventing the kind of industrial disasters that make international news and create new safety regulations written in the blood of people who thought they were just going to work. Your assignment for the day is helping with pipe inspection, which sounds safer than working on the drill floor, until you realize that pipe inspection involves examining drill pipe sections for damage while the pipe is being moved by cranes, operated in winds strong enough to turn steel pipes into guided missiles. Each section of pipe weighs 600 pounds and is 30 feet long, which means it has enough mass and length to act like a giant baseball bat if the wind catches it wrong. Watch the pipe swing, instructs Danny, the pipe inspector who's been doing this job for 11 years. Danny's survived 11 years of examining heavy steel pipes for microscopic cracks, while the pipes are being moved by equipment operated in weather conditions that would ground all aircraft and close all highways. Wind catches it wrong, it'll take your head clean off. The inspection process requires getting close enough to the pipe to examine its surface for cracks, wear patterns, and other signs of damage that could lead to failure downhole, which means standing within the swing radius of a 600-pound steel cylinder that's being moved by a crane operated by someone who can barely see through the rain and snow. See this crack? Danny points to a hairline fracture that's barely visible on the pipe surface. That's what we call a failure indicator. Means this section of pipe might fail under pressure. Can't use it for drilling. Finding damaged pipe sections is crucial for preventing blowouts, which happen when a drill pipe fails while drilling and allows high-pressure hydrocarbons to escape uncontrolled. Blowouts can cause explosions that destroy entire oil rigs and kill everyone aboard. They can also cause oil spills that devastate marine environments for decades. But preventing blowouts requires conducting detailed inspections of heavy equipment, while the equipment is being moved in weather conditions that make detailed inspection nearly impossible. You spend the morning learning to spot the subtle signs of pipe damage while trying not to get crushed by the pipes you're inspecting. It's like learning to perform quality control on artillery shells while they're being fired from cannons, except artillery shells don't weigh 600 pounds and aren't being moved by cranes operated in hurricane-force winds. Good eye, Danny says, when you spot a section of pipe with unusual wear patterns. That one's got internal erosion, probably been downhole too long. Send it back for reconditioning. Internal erosion is what happens when drilling mud flowing through the pipe at high pressure gradually wears away the steel from the inside. It's invisible from the outside, but it weakens the pipe enough that it could fail catastrophically under the pressures encountered during drilling operations. Finding an internally eroded pipe requires experience that takes years to develop, assuming you survive long enough to develop it. Lunch is interrupted by an emergency alarm that means something has gone wrong with the drilling operation. Emergency alarms on oil rigs sound different from regular alarms. They have the urgent, terrifying quality of sounds that announce immediate threats to human life. Everyone stops eating and looks around to see who's going to die. Mud pump failure, announces read over the intercom system. All available personnel to the drill floor. Mud pump failure during drilling operations is like engine failure during airplane flight. Technically survivable, but only if everything goes exactly right and nobody makes any mistakes while dealing with equipment that's designed to operate under pressures that could launch human bodies into space. The drilling mud circulation system has to keep running, or the drill bit will overheat and the hole will collapse, potentially trapping thousands of feet of drill pipe underground where it can't be recovered. You follow Danny and the other pipe inspection crew to the drill floor, where Red and his drilling crew are working frantically to switch to the backup mud pump system. The primary pump has seized up completely, probably because a bearing failed due to the constant vibration from the storm conditions. Switching to backup systems while maintaining circulation pressure requires coordination that would impress professional symphony conductors. Need hands on the standby pump, Red shouts over the noise of machinery and storm, and someone needs to check the pressure lines for damage. Checking pressure lines for damage means crawling through spaces barely large enough for human bodies while examining connections that are carrying drilling mud at pressures high enough to cut through steel. If a connection fails while you're examining it, you'll be killed by a stream of drilling mud moving fast enough to punch holes through metal plates. I'll check the lines, volunteers Jimmy, because Jimmy has 6 years of experience finding ways to risk his life while maintaining drilling equipment. New guy can help me. You follow Jimmy into the machinery spaces beneath the drill floor, crawling through passages that were designed by engineers who apparently never considered that human beings might need to access this equipment for maintenance. The spaces are filled with pipes carrying various fluids at various pressures, all of them capable of killing you if they fail while you're in their vicinity. Look for wet spots, Jimmy instructs, as you both examine pressure connections with flashlights while the entire rig rocks back and forth like a ship in a storm, which is exactly what it is. Wet spots mean leaks. Leaks mean the connection is failing. Failed connections mean we're all going to have a very bad day. You find 3 small leaks in the pressure system, each one indicating a connection that's gradually failing under the stress of operating in storm conditions. The leaks are small now, but they'll get larger as the drilling operation continues, eventually becoming large enough to cause catastrophic pressure loss or system failure. These connections need to be retorqued, Jimmy observes, which means tightening them while the system is operating at full pressure. Normally we'd shut down the system first, but we can't shut down the circulation or we'll lose the whole. Retorquing pressure connections while the system is running is like performing surgery on a patient's heart while the heart is still beating. Possible, but requiring skills and nerve that most people don't possess. Jimmy makes it look routine, which is how you know it's actually terrifying. The backup mud pump comes online smoothly, maintaining circulation pressure while the drilling crew works to diagnose the failure in the primary system. The seamless transition is the result of years of training and experience, but it's also dependent on equipment that's operating beyond its design specifications in environmental conditions that the manufacturers never intended. Primary pumps completely seized, reports Olaf, after spending 2 hours disassembling machinery while being thrown around by storm conditions. Bearing failure cascaded into shaft damage. We'll need parts from shore to fix it. Parts from shore. That means helicopter delivery, which means waiting for weather conditions that allow helicopters to fly in the North Sea during winter storms. Weather conditions that allow helicopter flights happen approximately never during winter storm season, which lasts from October through April, and sometimes longer if the North Sea is feeling particularly vindictive. How long can we run on the backup system? Red asks, knowing that backup systems aren't designed for continuous operation under full load conditions. Backup systems rated for 72 hours of continuous operation, Olaf replies. After that, we start risking secondary failures that could shut down the entire drilling operation. 72 hours. 3 days to either get replacement parts delivered by helicopter or fix the primary system using parts that don't exist on the rig. 3 days during which everyone will be working extended shifts to monitor backup systems that weren't designed to handle full operational loads for extended periods. The afternoon shift begins with weather conditions that have somehow gotten worse. The wind is now gusting to 80 miles per hour, which is strong enough to pick up loose equipment and turn it into projectiles. The waves have grown to 50 feet, which means they're now tall enough to look down at 5-story buildings while moving fast enough to destroy anything they hit. Weather Service says this storm's going to last another 2 days. Magnus reports, consulting weather reports that read like descriptions of natural disasters. After that, we get a brief break before the next system moves in. A brief break. In North Sea terms, that means 6 to 12 hours of weather that's only moderately life-threatening instead of actively homicidal. 6 to 12 hours during which helicopter flights might be possible, assuming the helicopter pilots are willing to risk their lives flying in conditions that would normally ground all aircraft. Your afternoon assignment is helping with equipment maintenance on the backup mud pump system, which is now carrying the full load of drilling operations while operating in environmental conditions that would shut down most industrial equipment. The backup system wasn't designed for continuous operation under these conditions, but oil rigs don't have the luxury of operating only under ideal conditions. Backup systems running hot, observes Pete, the mechanic responsible for keeping the mud pumps operational. Pete's been maintaining oil rig equipment for 14 years, which is approximately equivalent to serving 7 life sentences in conditions that would make industrial engineers have nervous breakdowns. Temperatures climbing toward the red zone. Running hot means the backup system is operating beyond its design specifications, generating more heat than its cooling systems can dissipate. If the temperature climbs too high, critical components will fail, shutting down the drilling operation and potentially causing a blowout that could destroy the entire rig. We need to increase cooling flow, Pete decides, which means modifying the cooling system while it's operating at full capacity. New guy can help me reroute the cooling lines. Rerouting cooling lines on an operating mud pump system is like performing plumbing repairs on a house while water is flowing through all the pipes at maximum pressure. Except the water is industrial coolant that's toxic enough to cause chemical burns, and the pipes are carrying fluids at pressures that could launch a human body into orbit if a connection fails. You spend the afternoon learning to modify industrial cooling systems while wearing protective equipment that makes fine motor control nearly impossible. The work requires precision that would challenge professional surgeons, performed while wearing gloves thick enough to stop chemical burns and safety glasses that fog up constantly due to temperature differences between your face and the surrounding air. "Hand me that wrench," Pete says, pointing to a tool that weighs about 10 pounds and is designed to apply torque forces that could crush human bones. We need to retorque this connection while maintaining system pressure. The connection Pete is working on carries cooling fluid at pressure high enough to cut through human skin like a scalpel. If the connection fails while he's working on it, the escaping fluid will be moving fast enough to cause injuries that would impress emergency room doctors who specialize in industrial accidents. System pressures holding steady, you report, watching gauges that show pressures in ranges that seem designed to test the limits of human engineering. Temperatures starting to drop. The cooling system modification works, bringing the backup mud pump temperature down to levels that won't cause immediate component failure. It's a temporary solution, but temporary solutions are what keep oil rigs operational in conditions that would shut down most industrial facilities. Everything on an oil rig is a temporary solution, because permanent solutions require controlled environments and unlimited resources, neither of which exist in the middle of the North Sea during winter storms. Dinner is served while the rig experiences what can only be described as oceanic violence. The waves are now large enough that they occasionally break over the drill floor, which is 60 feet above normal sea level. When waves are breaking over structures that are 60 feet above the ocean, you're experiencing weather conditions that exist only in the nightmares of marine engineers. Rig's handling the seas pretty well, Tommy observes optimistically, as he serves food that somehow tastes like it was prepared by someone who learned cooking from instruction manuals written by people who had never actually seen food. She's built to take this kind of punishment. Built to take this kind of punishment. Oil rigs are engineered to withstand extreme weather conditions, but they're also operating at the absolute limits of human engineering capability. Every component is stressed to its maximum design load. Every system is operating beyond normal parameters. Every person is working in conditions that would be considered unsafe in any other industry. "How's the backup pump holding up?" asks Dave, the safety officer who's responsible for ensuring that people only die in ways that comply with safety regulations. "Temperatures," Pete replies, "but we're running her hard. Another day or two at this load, and we'll start seeing accelerated wear on critical components." Accelerated wear on critical components. That's engineer speak for the equipment is being destroyed by the operating conditions, but slowly ends the job before everything breaks completely. It's the kind of calculated risk that oil companies make every day, because oil extraction is profitable enough to justify operating equipment beyond its design specifications in environmental conditions that would terrify the engineers who designed it. After dinner, you're assigned to watch duty, which involves monitoring the drilling operation while the regular crew gets a few hours of rest. Watch duty sounds easier than active drilling work until you realize that monitoring industrial equipment means being responsible for detecting problems before they become disasters that kill everyone on the rig. Watch the pressure gauges, instructs Sam, the driller you're relieving. Sam's been on watch for 12 hours straight, monitoring systems that could fail catastrophically with no warning beyond subtle changes in gauge readings. If anything looks unusual, call me immediately. Don't try to fix problems yourself. That's excellent advice for someone watching drilling equipment that operates at pressures high in space, powered by engines that generate enough force to move mountains, controlled by systems that require years of training to understand. But it's also advice that becomes problematic when problems develop faster than help can arrive. You spend the evening watching gauges that show the operating parameters of equipment you don't fully understand, looking for changes that might indicate developing problems you're not qualified to diagnose. It's like being asked to monitor the health of a patient by watching vital signs displayed in a language you don't speak, knowing that misreading the signs could result in death for everyone in the hospital. The drilling operation runs smoothly for about 2 hours, which is approximately the maximum length of time that anything on an oil rig operates without developing problems that require immediate attention. The problem that develops is subtle at first. Just a slight increase in pump pressure that could indicate normal variation in drilling conditions, or could indicate that something is going catastrophically wrong several thousand feet underground. Pump pressure's up about 10%, you report to Sam over the radio system, still within normal operating range, but trending higher. How fast is it climbing? Sam asks. Because the rate of change is often more important than the absolute value when monitoring drilling operations. About 2% every 15 minutes, you reply. After watching the gauges for another quarter hour, steady increase, not fluctuating. Steady increase in pump pressure usually indicates that the drilling assembly is encountering harder rock formations, which is normal during drilling operations. But it can also indicate that the drill bit is wearing out, or that the hole is collapsing, or that the drilling fluid circulation is being restricted by equipment failure. Distinguishing between normal operations and developing disasters requires experience that takes years to develop. Keep monitoring, Sam decides. If it goes above 15%, call me back immediately. You spend the next 3 hours watching pump pressure climb slowly but steadily toward the limits of safe operation. Each gauge reading brings the system closer to conditions that could cause equipment failure, blowout, or explosion. But each gauge reading is still technically within acceptable parameters, making it impossible to know whether you're monitoring normal drilling operations or watching a disaster develop in slow motion. At 2 in the morning, during your 4th hour of watch duty, the backup mud pump that's been carrying the full load of drilling operations develops a problem that transforms your monitoring duties from routine to terrifying. The pump pressure suddenly spikes 20% above normal operating parameters, which could indicate catastrophic equipment failure or developing blowout conditions. Sam, you call over the radio. Pump pressure just jumped 20%. We're in the red zone. On my way, Sam replies. But you can hear in his voice that he's been expecting this call. Backup systems operating beyond their design specifications in extreme environmental conditions don't last indefinitely. They fail gradually, then suddenly, in ways that can destroy entire oil rigs if not handled properly. Sam arrives on the drill floor within 2 minutes, followed by Red and most of the drilling crew. Nobody looks surprised by the emergency because everyone on an oil rig understands that emergencies aren't unusual events. They're normal operating conditions that happen frequently enough to be considered routine. Pumps cavitating, Red diagnoses. After examining the pressure readings and listening to the distinctive sound of a mud pump that's failing under load, suction sides probably got air in the system. Cavitating pumps are what happen when air gets into the suction side of a pump system, causing the pump to lose efficiency and generating pressure spikes that can damage equipment or cause system failure. It's a problem that can usually be fixed by bleeding air from the system, but bleeding air from a high-pressure drilling mud system while maintaining circulation requires skills that most people don't possess. We need to bleed the system without losing circulation pressure, Red decides. If we lose circulation, we'll lose the hole. Losing the hole means losing control of the drilling operation, which can lead to blowouts that destroy oil rigs and kill everyone aboard. But bleeding air from a high-pressure system while maintaining circulation pressure requires working with equipment that could kill you instantly if a connection fails or a valve is opened at the wrong time. I'll handle the bleeding valve, Red says, because Red has 15 years of experience working with equipment that was designed to extract petroleum from beneath the ocean floor, regardless of how many people it kills in the process. Everyone else stay clear of the pressure lines. The bleeding process takes 30 minutes of careful valve manipulation while monitoring pressure gauges that show readings high enough to make safety engineers request transfers to less dangerous industries. Red works with the calm precision of someone who's performed this operation dozens of times under conditions that would terrify the engineers who designed the equipment. Pressure's stabilizing, Red reports, as the pump cavitation stops and the system returns to normal operating parameters. But this pump's not going to last much longer running at these loads. Not going to last much longer. That's oil rig terminology for we've temporarily fixed the immediate problem. But the underlying causes haven't been addressed and the equipment will probably fail again soon, possibly in ways that kill everyone. It's the kind of prognosis that would shut down most industrial operations, but oil rigs don't have the luxury of shutting down every time equipment operates beyond its design specifications. Your third day on the oil rig begins with weather conditions that have somehow transcended the normal categories of bad weather and entered realms that don't have names because meteorologists never imagined that weather could be this: hostile to human life. The wind is now gusting to 90 miles per hour, which is strong enough to relocate buildings that aren't specifically designed to withstand hurricane-force winds. The waves are 60 feet tall, which means they're now approximately the height of 6-story buildings moving at 30 miles per hour. Weather Service has upgraded the storm to extreme, Magnus reports, consulting weather reports that read like descriptions of natural disasters written by people who gave up trying to use normal weather terminology. Visibility is down to 0. All helicopter operations are suspended indefinitely. All helicopter operations suspended indefinitely. That means no parts delivery, no personnel evacuation, and no medical evacuation if someone gets injured. Everyone on the rig is completely isolated from the outside world until weather conditions improve enough to allow aircraft to fly, which might happen sometime next week, if the North Sea decides to stop being actively homicidal toward human life. Breakfast consists of food that somehow tastes worse than usual, which shouldn't be possible, but apparently Tommy's cooking skills decline proportionally with weather conditions. The eggs have achieved a texture that violates several laws of physics. The bacon looks like it was prepared by someone who learned meat preparation from instruction manuals written in languages that don't have words for edible. The coffee tastes like it was brewed using water that was filtered through industrial lubricants. Backup pump failed completely during the night. Red announces during the morning safety briefing. We're running the emergency backup system, which isn't designed for continuous operation. Emergency backup system. That's the system that's supposed to keep the rig operational just long enough to safely shut down drilling operations and evacuate personnel. It's not designed to maintain full drilling operations for extended periods, but evacuating personnel requires weather conditions that allow helicopters to fly, and weather conditions that allow helicopters to fly don't exist in the current meteorological nightmare surrounding the rig. How long can the emergency system run? Asks Bill, knowing that the answer will determine whether everyone survives until the weather improves or dies in an industrial disaster that will make international news. Emergency systems rated for 12 hours of operation under normal conditions, Red replies. Under current load conditions, maybe 6 hours before we start risking catastrophic failure. 6 hours. That's how long everyone has to either repair the backup mud pump system or face the choice between shutting down drilling operations and risking a blowout that could destroy the entire rig. 6 hours during which the emergency backup system will be operating beyond its design specifications while being battered by weather conditions that would shut down most industrial facilities. Your assignment for the day is helping Pete and Olaf attempt to repair the backup mud pump system using parts that don't exist and tools that weren't designed for the repairs they need to perform. It's like being asked to rebuild a race car engine using kitchen utensils and spare parts from a bicycle. Except the race car is currently racing and stopping, it could cause an explosion that would destroy everything within a 5-mile radius. Pump bearings completely seized. Pete diagnoses after disassembling machinery while being thrown around by storm conditions that would make mechanical work impossible under normal circumstances. We need a replacement bearing that weighs about 200 pounds and requires precision installation that's usually done in controlled factory conditions. A replacement bearing that weighs 200 pounds. Oil rig equipment operates on scales that make normal industrial machinery look like toys. Every component is sized to handle forces that would destroy most buildings, which means that replacing components requires equipment and techniques that don't exist outside of specialized industrial facilities. We don't have replacement bearings. Olaf observes, consulting an inventory that was prepared by people who never imagined that backup systems would need to operate continuously under extreme load conditions. Closest thing we have is a bearing from the deck crane, but it's the wrong size and probably won't fit. Probably won't fit. On an oil rig, probably won't fit is the starting point for engineering solutions that violate most principles of mechanical design, but sometimes work long enough to prevent everyone from dying. Oil rig maintenance involves adapting components designed for one purpose to serve completely different functions, using techniques that would make mechanical engineers have nervous breakdowns. We'll make it fit, Pete decides, with the confidence of someone who spent 14 years making impossible repairs under conditions that would shut down normal industrial operations. New guy can help me modify the bearing housing. Modifying bearing housing for industrial equipment means using cutting tools to change the dimensions of components that were designed by engineers whose tolerances for operating under extreme conditions. It's like performing surgery on a patient's heart, using tools designed for construction work, while the patient is running a marathon during an earthquake. You spend the morning learning to modify precision-engineered components using tools that are designed for rough industrial work rather than precision machining. The work requires accuracy that would challenge professional machinists, performed while wearing protective equipment that makes fine motor control nearly impossible, standing on surfaces that won't stay level for more than 10 seconds at a time. Cut it slow and steady, Pete instructs, as you operate a cutting torch that's capable of slicing through steel plates like butter. Too fast, and you'll cut too deep. Too slow, and the heat will warp the housing. The cutting torch operates at temperatures high enough to melt most metals, producing flames that could cause third-degree burns through protective clothing. Using cutting torches on an oil rig during storm conditions requires skills that combine welding expertise with acrobatic ability, because maintaining precise control of cutting operations while standing on a moving platform requires balance that would impress professional gymnasts. That's looking good, Pete observes, as you carefully enlarge the bearing housing to accommodate the slightly oversized replacement bearing. Another 1/4 inch, and it should fit perfectly. Should fit perfectly. On an oil rig, should fit perfectly means the modification might work well enough to keep everyone alive until proper remade using appropriate parts and controlled working conditions. It's the kind of engineering compromise that would horrify the people who designed the original equipment, but sometimes prevents industrial disasters. The bearing installation takes 4 hours of work that would normally be performed in a controlled factory environment using specialized equipment operated by trained technicians. Instead, it's performed on an oil rig during extreme weather conditions by people using improvised techniques and modified tools while standing on surfaces that are constantly moving in 3 dimensions. Bearing seated, Pete announces, after installation work that required precision, normally associated with watchmaking, combined with physical strength normally associated with moving furniture. Housing temperature looks normal. No unusual vibration. No unusual vibration. That's the standard for success when installing improvised repairs on industrial equipment operating beyond its design specifications. Not optimal performance in operation, just the absence of obvious signs of impending catastrophic failure. The modified mud pump system comes online just as the emergency backup system reaches its operational limits. The timing is crucial, because losing circulation pressure during drilling operations could cause a blowout that would destroy the entire rig and kill everyone aboard. The seamless transition from emergency backup to improvised repair represents hours of coordinated work performed under conditions that would shut down most industrial operations. Pressures holding steady. Red reports, monitoring gauges that show the operating parameters of equipment that's now running on improvised repairs and modified components. Temperatures within acceptable limits. We're back to normal drilling operations. Normal drilling operations. On a North Sea oil rig during extreme weather conditions, normal drilling operations involve using equipment that's been modified beyond manufacturer specifications, operated by people working extended shifts under environmental conditions that would terrify the engineers who designed the equipment. But it's normal for oil rigs, because oil rigs don't have the luxury of operating only under ideal conditions. Lunch is celebrated as a victory meal, even though the food still tastes like it was prepared by someone who learned cooking from instruction manuals written by people who had never actually tasted food. But everyone's alive, the drilling operation is running, and the improvised repairs are holding, which represents success by oil rig standards. Nice work on the bearing modification, Magnus tells you, as you both eat food that somehow tastes like industrial lubricants mixed with salt water. Not many people can handle precision cutting work while standing on a moving platform in hurricane force winds. Hurricane force winds. That's what you've been working on for the past 3 days. Winds strong enough to destroy buildings, combined with waves tall enough down at office buildings, while operating industrial equipment that was designed to extract petroleum from beneath the ocean floor regardless of environmental conditions or human casualties. How long until weather conditions improve? You ask, knowing that everyone on the rig is thinking the same question, but nobody wants to ask it because the answer might be depressing enough to affect morale. Weather Service says this storm system should move through by tomorrow. Magnus replies, "Course, they also said yesterday's storm would move through by today, and the day before they said the whole system would miss us completely." Weather forecasting in the North Sea operates on the same principles as astrology, except astrology occasionally produces accurate predictions. North Sea weather systems develop and change faster than meteorologists can track them, producing conditions that exceed all previous records, and then exceed their own records before anyone can update the record books. The afternoon shift begins with news that the primary mud pump, which failed 2 days ago, has been successfully repaired using parts cannibalized from other equipment and techniques that would void every warranty ever written. The repairs were performed by Olaf and 2 other mechanics working in conditions that would shut down most industrial maintenance operations. Primary pumps back online, Olaf announces, with the satisfaction of someone who's just performed mechanical miracles using improvised tools and spare parts that weren't designed for the applications they're being used for. Should be good for another few weeks, assuming we don't encounter any unusual drilling conditions. Unusual drilling conditions. On a North Sea oil rig, unusual drilling conditions include everything from encountering unexpected rock formations to equipment failures caused by environmental conditions that normal drilling conditions are unusual enough that unusual drilling conditions exist in realms that don't have names because engineers never imagined that drilling could be performed under such hostile circumstances. Your afternoon assignment is helping with deck maintenance, which involves securing equipment that's been loosened by 3 days of weather conditions that would relocate most buildings. The deck maintenance crew works with the systematic thoroughness of people who understand that loose equipment on an oil rig becomes projectiles that can kill people or damage critical systems. Check every bolt, every connection, every piece of equipment, instructs Frank, the deck foreman who's responsible for ensuring that the oil rig doesn't gradually disassemble itself under the constant battering of extreme weather conditions. Anything that's come loose needs to be retightened or replaced. Every bolt, every connection, every piece of equipment. Oil rigs contain thousands of components, each one critical for safe operation, each one subjected to forces that would destroy most industrial equipment. Checking every component requires hours of detailed inspection work performed while being battered by weather conditions that make detailed inspection nearly impossible. You spend the afternoon learning to identify the subtle signs of equipment failure that develop when industrial machinery operates beyond its design specifications for extended periods. Loose bolts that could allow critical components to fail. Cracked welds that could allow structural elements to separate. Damaged connections that could allow high-pressure systems to fail catastrophically. See this weld crack? Frank points to a hairline fracture in a structural connection that's barely visible against the weathered steel. That's what we call a stress indicator. Means this connection is being loaded beyond its design specifications. Stress indicators are the early warning signs that structural components are approaching failure. Finding them requires experience that takes years to develop, assuming you survive long enough to develop the experience. Missing them can result in structural failures that destroy entire oil rigs and kill everyone aboard. How do we fix something like that, you ask, examining a crack that looks like it would require major structural repairs to address properly? Depends on how critical the component is, Frank replies. Non-critical components we can reinforce with additional welding. Critical structural elements we have to monitor closely and hope they don't fail before we can get back to port for proper repairs. Hope they don't fail. That's the maintenance strategy for critical structural components on oil rigs operating under extreme conditions. Not preventive maintenance, not proactive replacement, just careful monitoring and hope that engineering margins are sufficient to prevent catastrophic failure until proper repairs can be performed in controlled conditions. Dinner features food that has somehow achieved new levels of culinary dysfunction, which shouldn't be possible, but apparently Tommy's cooking abilities continue to decline proportionally with weather conditions and the general stress level of everyone on the rig. The vegetables have been cooked to the point where they could be used as construction materials. The meat has achieved a texture that doesn't occur in nature. The bread looks like it was baked by someone who learned bread making from instruction manuals written in languages that don't have words for edible. Storm's starting to weaken, Tommy announces optimistically as he serves food that could be used to test military equipment for durability. Weather service says we might get a break in the weather by tomorrow afternoon. A break in the weather. In North Sea terms, that means 6 to 12 hours of conditions that are only moderately life-threatening instead of actively homicidal. 6 to 12 hours during which helicopter operations might be possible, assuming helicopter pilots are willing to risk their lives flying in conditions that would normally ground all aircraft. Think we'll get a helicopter delivery? Asks Dave, knowing that everyone on the rig is thinking about the possibility of receiving fresh food, mail, and replacement parts for equipment that's been operating beyond its design specifications for extended periods. Depends on how much the weather actually improves, Red replies. Helicopter pilots aren't stupid. They won't fly in conditions that are likely to kill them just to deliver mail to oil workers who chose to work in the middle of the North Sea during winter storm season. Helicopter pilots aren't stupid. That's probably true, but it raises questions about the intelligence of people who choose to work on oil rigs in the middle of the North Sea during winter storm season. Questions that everyone on the rig has probably asked themselves at some point, usually during weather conditions that would make Arctic explorers request transfers to more comfortable assignments. After dinner, you're assigned to night watch duty again, monitoring drilling operations while the regular crew gets a few hours of rest. Night watch duty involves watching gauges that show the operating parameters of equipment that's been repaired, using improvised techniques and modified components, looking for signs of developing problems that could cause disasters. Keep an eye on the pump temperature, Sam instructs, as he hands over monitoring duties for equipment that's operating beyond its design specifications using parts that weren't designed for the applications they're serving. Modified bearing might run hot until it breaks in properly. Modified bearings might run hot. That's the kind of technical uncertainty that makes monitoring industrial equipment interesting in the same way that defusing bombs is interesting. You're watching for signs of problems that might indicate normal break-in procedures or might indicate developing failures that could cause catastrophic equipment damage. The night shift passes smoothly for the first time since you arrived on the oil rig. The drilling operation runs without major problems. The weather gradually begins to improve from actively trying to kill everyone to moderately life-threatening. The equipment operates within acceptable parameters, despite being repaired using techniques that would void every warranty ever written. At 3 in the morning, you're relieved by the day shift crew and finally get a chance to sleep for more than 4 hours consecutively. Your bunk feels like luxury accommodations compared to working on deck during hurricane-force winds, even though it's still essentially a coffin-sized space carved out of a steel structure that's being constantly battered by oceanic forces. You fall asleep to the sound of the rig's hull flexing under wave action, which has become as familiar as your own heartbeat. The constant noise of machinery operating at maximum capacity fades into background sound that's somehow comforting, because it means the equipment is still working and everyone is still alive. Your 4th day on the oil rig begins with the miraculous news that the weather has improved enough to allow helicopter operations. Not comfortable helicopter operations, but operations that fall within the generous safety margins that helicopter pilots use when flying to oil rigs in the North Sea during winter, which means weather conditions that would ground all aircraft under normal circumstances, but are considered acceptable for delivering essential supplies to people who are isolated in the middle of hostile ocean. Helicopters inbound with replacement parts and fresh food. Bill announces during the morning safety briefing, ETA is approximately 2 hours, assuming weather conditions don't deteriorate. Fresh food. After 4 days of eating meals prepared by Tommy using ingredients that seemed designed to test human digestive systems for durability, the prospect of fresh food seems almost impossibly luxurious. Fresh food that was prepared by people who learned cooking from sources other than technical manuals written by engineers. Also bringing mail and a replacement crew member, Bill continues. Jimmy's being rotated off the rig for medical evaluation. Jimmy, the experienced roughneck who taught you how to operate drilling equipment while standing on moving platforms during extreme weather conditions, is being evacuated for medical reasons that nobody discusses but everyone understands. Working on oil rigs under extreme conditions takes a physical and psychological toll that accumulates over time, eventually requiring medical attention that can only be provided on shore. The helicopter approach is a demonstration of piloting skills that would impress professional aerobatics performers. The aircraft has to land on a platform that's moving in 3 dimensions while being buffeted by winds that are still strong enough to relocate small buildings. The pilot manages the approach with the calm precision of someone who's performed this operation hundreds of times under conditions that would terrify most pilots. "Beautiful landing," observes Charlie, watching the helicopter settle onto the landing platform with the grace of a professional dancer performing during an earthquake. That pilot's got skills that would make astronauts jealous. The replacement parts include components that were manufactured specifically for oil rig equipment operating under extreme conditions, bearings designed to handle loads that would destroy normal industrial equipment, seals rated for pressures that could launch human bodies into orbit, filters capable of removing contaminants from fluids that are toxic enough to dissolve most organic materials. New bearings rated for 20% higher loads than the original. Pete observes, examining replacement parts that represent improvements on equipment that was already operating at the limits of mechanical engineering. Should handle current operating conditions with some margin for safety. Some margin for safety. On an oil rig, safety margins are theoretical concepts that exist mainly in engineering textbooks and manufacturer specifications. Real-world oil rig operations consume safety margins faster than oil companies consume environmental resources, leaving equipment operating at the absolute limits of its design capabilities. The fresh food delivery includes vegetables that are still recognizably vegetables, meat that hasn't been processed into textures that don't occur in nature, and bread, that was apparently baked by people who understand the fundamental principles of bread making. Tommy greets the fresh food delivery with the enthusiasm of someone who's been trying to prepare meals using ingredients that were selected by people who had never actually seen food before. Real potatoes. Tommy says reverently, examining vegetables that haven't been subjected to processing techniques that violate several laws of physics. And meat that still looks like it came from actual animals. The mail delivery includes letters from families who are probably wondering why their relatives chose to work in conditions that would make Arctic explorers request transfers to more comfortable assignments. Letters that mention ordinary problems like traffic jams and weather that's merely unpleasant, written by people who can't imagine working in environments where routine operations involve equipment that could kill you instantly if you make a single mistake. Your letter from home mentions that your sister got a promotion at her office job, which seems impossibly luxurious compared to working on an oil rig where promotions usually mean getting assigned to even more dangerous tasks. Office jobs where the biggest safety hazard is probably paper cuts, performed in buildings that have heating systems and don't move constantly in 3 dimensions. "Miss Home?" asks Magnus, reading his own mail with the concentration of someone trying to remember what normal life feels like. "Starting to," you reply, which is the most honest answer you can give, without admitting that you're beginning to question the sanity of everyone who chooses to work on oil rigs for longer than absolutely necessary. The replacement crew member is named Eric, a Norwegian roughneck who's worked North Sea oil rigs for 12 years. Eric has the weathered appearance of someone who's spent more than a decade working in conditions that would age most people beyond recognition, combined with the cheerful demeanor of someone who's somehow managed to maintain a sense of humor despite everything. "Welcome to paradise," Eric says, looking around the oil rig with the appreciation of someone who's genuinely happy to be working in the middle of the North Sea during winter storm season. "Beautiful weather today, practically tropical compared to last week." Practically tropical. The current weather conditions include winds gusting to 40 miles per hour, waves 30 feet tall, and air temperatures that would freeze exposed skin within minutes. But compared to the conditions you've experienced over the past 4 days, it does feel practically tropical. Your afternoon assignment is helping Eric get oriented to the rig's current operating conditions and equipment status, which means explaining how industrial equipment has been modified beyond manufacturer specifications using improvised techniques and spare parts that weren't designed for the applications they're serving. Primary mud pumps running on a modified bearing that we machined to fit using cutting torches, you explain, showing Eric equipment that's operating successfully despite being repaired using techniques that would void every warranty ever written. Secondary pumps completely rebuilt using parts from 3 different pumps. Standard North Sea maintenance procedures? Eric observes, examining repairs that would horrify the engineers who designed the original equipment. If it works, and nobody dies, it's good engineering. If it works and nobody dies, it's good engineering. That's the engineering philosophy that keeps oil rigs operational under conditions that would shut down most industrial facilities. Not optimal engineering, not factory specification performance, just functional engineering that prevents immediate catastrophic failure. Eric adapts to the rig's operations with the ease of someone who's spent 12 years working with equipment that operates beyond its design specifications under environmental conditions that exceed all engineering assumptions. He fits into the drilling crew's coordination patterns as if he's been working with them for years, which is probably because all experienced oil rig workers develop similar skills for staying alive while operating dangerous equipment under hostile conditions. Good crew, Eric tells you during the evening meal, which features fresh food that actually tastes like food rather than industrial lubricants mixed with salt water. Solid safety practices. Equipment's in better shape than most rigs I've worked. Better shape than most rigs. That's a disturbing observation, because the equipment on this rig has been operating beyond its design specifications for extended periods, repaired using improvised techniques that would horrify safety inspectors, and subjected to environmental conditions that would destroy most industrial machinery. What's the worst rig you've worked? You ask, trying to imagine oil rig conditions that would make your current situation look comfortable by comparison. Rig off the Shetland Islands in '82, Eric replies, with the distant expression of someone recalling experiences that probably still cause nightmares. Lost 2 crew members to equipment failures, had 3 separate blowout incidents, worked 60 days straight without resupply because the weather was too bad for helicopter operations. 60 days without resupply. That means 60 days of eating food that was stored for emergency situations, using replacement parts that had to be improvised from materials that weren't designed for the applications they were serving, and operating equipment that gradually deteriorated beyond safe operating conditions because proper maintenance requires parts and tools that can only be delivered by aircraft. The evening shift passes quietly, with drilling operations running smoothly, using equipment that's been repaired and modified to handle operating conditions that exceed all engineering specifications. The weather continues to improve from moderately life-threatening to merely uncomfortable, which feels like a dramatic improvement after 4 days of conditions that would shut down most human activities. You spend your evening free time writing another letter home, trying to describe your experiences without mentioning anything that would make your family worry about your safety, which means leaving out most of the details about your daily routine, because describing actual oil rig working conditions would make them think you joined some kind of industrial death cult that worships petroleum extraction. Having an interesting experience, you write, which is technically accurate if you define interesting as constantly terrifying but somehow educational. Learning a lot about industrial equipment and weather conditions. Learning a lot about industrial equipment and weather conditions. That's probably the most accurate description of oil rig work that doesn't mention the constant possibility of death by crushing, explosion, fire, drowning, or exposure to environmental conditions that would kill most people within minutes. Your 5th day begins with the news that weather conditions have improved enough to allow normal helicopter operations, which means the possibility of crew rotation for people who've completed their 14-day assignments. Normal helicopter operations means flights that only risk the lives of helicopter pilots rather than guaranteeing their deaths, which represents a significant improvement in aviation safety by North Sea standards. Normal helicopter operations also mean the possibility of receiving mail, fresh food, and replacement parts on a schedule that's measured in days rather than weeks. Crew rotation helicopters coming in this afternoon, Bill announces during the morning safety briefing. Anyone who's completed their rotation can request transport back to shore. Back to shore. After 5 days of working in conditions that would shut down most industrial operations, the prospect of returning to dry land seems almost impossibly luxurious. Land that doesn't move constantly in 3 dimensions, buildings that have heating systems and don't require structural modifications to prevent them from being destroyed by weather. Food that's prepared by people who learned cooking from sources other than technical manuals written by engineers. But crew rotation also means saying goodbye to people who've become more than co-workers during 5 days of shared survival under conditions that would test the limits of human endurance. Magnus, who taught you how to sleep in a bunk that's barely wider than a coffin, while the entire structure rocks back and forth like a ship in a storm. Red, who showed you how to operate drilling equipment that could kill you instantly if you make a single mistake. Pete, who demonstrated how to repair industrial machinery using improvised techniques that would void every warranty ever written. Your morning assignment is helping with final equipment checks before the drilling operation enters a new phase that will require even more precise coordination between crew members, operating equipment that's designed to bore holes through the Earth's crust while standing on a platform that's constantly moving in response to oceanic forces. We're drilling through a formation that's known for causing problems. Red explains, consulting geological surveys that describe rock formations in terms that sound like descriptions of industrial hazards. High-pressure gas pockets, unstable shale layers, rock that's hard enough to destroy drill bits. High-pressure gas pockets. Those are underground deposits of natural gas, under pressure high enough to cause blowouts that can destroy entire oil rigs and kill everyone aboard. Drilling through high-pressure gas pockets requires techniques that combine the precision of surgery with the power of industrial demolition, performed by people standing on platforms that are constantly moving in 3 dimensions. What happens if we hit a gas pocket, you ask, knowing that everyone's thinking the same question but nobody wants to ask it because the answer might be more terrifying than the uncertainty. Depends on how much pressure and how much gas, Red replies, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who's dealt with this exact situation multiple times during his 15 years of drilling holes through formations that were specifically designed by geology to kill oil workers. Small pocket, we can control it with mud weight. Large pocket, we shut down immediately and hope the blowout preventers work. Hope the blowout preventers work. Blowout preventers are massive pieces of equipment designed to seal the drill hole if high-pressure hydrocarbons try to escape uncontrolled. They're the last line of defense against oil rigs, and they work most of the time, assuming they're properly maintained and operated by people who understand exactly how to use them under emergency conditions. The drilling operation begins with the systematic precision of people who've performed this exact procedure hundreds of times, under conditions that would terrify the engineers who designed the equipment. Each crew member knows exactly what their responsibilities are and how to coordinate their actions with everyone else, because coordination failures during drilling operations can result in disasters that make international news. Pressure's looking good, Red reports, monitoring gauges that show the operating parameters of equipment that's designed to operate under pressures that could launch human bodies into orbit. Mud weight's optimal for current formation. Rate of penetration is within expected parameters. Rate of penetration is the speed at which the drill bit cuts through rock formations. Too fast, and the drill bit overheats or the hole becomes unstable. Too slow, and the drilling operation takes longer than scheduled, which costs money that oil companies would prefer to spend on executive bonuses rather than on additional days of operating oil rigs under extreme conditions. You spend the morning learning to monitor drilling operations that involve equipment operating at the absolute limits of mechanical engineering capability. Every gauge reading represents forces that would destroy most buildings. Every procedure involves coordinating the actions of people operating machinery that could kill them instantly if anyone makes a mistake. Contact, Red announces, as the drill bit encounters the geological formation that's known for causing problems. Pressure's starting to climb. Everyone stay alert. Everyone stay alert. That's the standard instruction for drilling operations that are about to encounter conditions that could cause blowouts, explosions, or other disasters that would make emergency response teams request additional hazard pay. Everyone stay alert while operating equipment that requires constant attention under normal conditions and becomes actively homicidal under abnormal conditions. The pressure climbs slowly but steadily as the drill bit penetrates rock formations that contain high-pressure gas deposits. Each gauge reading brings the drilling operation closer to conditions that could cause catastrophic equipment failure or uncontrolled hydrocarbon release. But each gauge reading is still technically within acceptable parameters, making it impossible to know whether you're monitoring normal drilling operations or watching a disaster develop in slow motion. Gas shows are increasing, reports the mud logger, who monitors the drilling fluid returning from downhole for signs of hydrocarbon contamination. Nothing dangerous yet, but we're definitely drilling through a gas-bearing formation. Gas shows are traces of natural gas that appear in the drilling fluid when the drill bit cuts through gas-bearing rock formations. Small gas shows are normal during drilling operations. Large gas shows indicate developing blowout conditions that could kill everyone on the rig if not handled properly. Lunch is interrupted by an alarm that indicates developing problems with the drilling operation. Not an emergency alarm, but the kind of warning signal that means something is going wrong, and everyone needs to pay attention to prevent it from becoming an emergency that kills people. Pump pressure's climbing faster than expected, Red announces over the intercom system. We're going to circulate bottoms up to check for gas contamination. Circulate bottoms up means pumping drilling fluid down the hole and back to the surface to bring up fluid that's been in contact with the rock formations at the bottom of the hole. It's a procedure that allows the drilling crew to monitor exactly what geological conditions they're encountering thousands of feet underground. The circulation process takes 45 minutes of careful pump operation while monitoring pressure gauges that show readings high enough to make safety engineers request transfers to less dangerous industries. Everyone watches the returning drilling fluid for signs of gas contamination that could indicate developing blowout conditions. Gas levels are elevated but manageable, reports the mudlogger, after analyzing fluid samples that contain traces of hydrocarbons under pressure high enough to cause explosions if not handled properly. We can continue drilling with increased mud weight. Increased mud weight means adding materials to the drilling fluid to increase its density, which increases the pressure at the bottom of the hole, which helps prevent high-pressure gas from entering the wellbore and causing blowouts. It's a balancing act that requires precision normally associated with pharmaceutical manufacturing, combined with the industrial power normally associated with strip mining. The afternoon drilling proceeds smoothly, with pressure maintained at levels that prevent gas influx while allowing continued penetration through rock formations that seem specifically designed to test the limits of drilling technology. The crew coordinates their actions with the unconscious precision of people who've learned that small mistakes during drilling operations can become large disasters very quickly. "We're through the gas zone," Red announces. After 6 hours of drilling through geological formations that could have caused explosions capable of destroying the entire rig. Pressure's stabilizing. We can return to normal drilling parameters. On a North Sea oil rig, normal drilling parameters involve operating equipment at pressures that would destroy most buildings, coordinated by people working shifts that would be illegal in most industries, under environmental conditions that would shut down most industrial operations. But it's normal for oil rigs, because oil rigs exist to extract petroleum from beneath the ocean floor regardless of safety considerations or human comfort. Dinner features fresh food that actually tastes like it was prepared by people who understand the basic principles of cooking, rather than food that seems designed to test human digestive systems for durability. The improvement in food quality represents one of the few aspects of oil rig life that has actually gotten better during your 5 days of working, in conditions that would make Arctic explorers request transfers to more comfortable assignments. "Good work today," Eric tells you, as you both eat food that doesn't taste like industrial lubricants mixed with salt water. Drilling through gas formations is tricky business. Takes steady nerves and good coordination. Those are the personal qualities required for drilling holes through rock formations that contain high-pressure hydrocarbons capable of causing explosions that would destroy entire oil rigs. Personal qualities that most people don't possess, which explains why oil rig work tends to attract people who are either unusually brave or unusually poor at risk assessment. How often do drilling operations encounter problems like today, you ask, trying to understand whether today's experience was unusually dangerous or just routine oil rig operations? "Depends on what you mean by problems," Eric replies, with the philosophical perspective of someone who's spent 12 years working in an industry where routine operations routinely risk the lives of everyone involved. Gas shows like today happen maybe once a week. Equipment failures that could kill people happen maybe once a month. Weather conditions that make normal work impossible happen maybe once a week during winter. That means spending approximately 25% of winter working in weather conditions that would shut down most human activities, operating equipment that fails in potentially lethal ways approximately once a month, while drilling through geological formations that could cause explosions approximately once a week. The evening shift passes quietly, with drilling operations proceeding through rock formations that don't contain high-pressure gas deposits or other geological features specifically designed to kill oil workers. The routine nature of evening drilling operations feels almost relaxing after a day of working with equipment that could have caused explosions capable of destroying everything within a 5-mile radius. You spend your evening free time trying to process everything you've experienced during 5 days of working on a North Sea oil rig during winter storm conditions. The constant noise of machinery operating at maximum capacity. The perpetual motion of a platform that's constantly battered by oceanic forces. The systematic coordination required to operate equipment that could kill everyone instantly if anyone makes a mistake. Thinking about staying for another rotation? Magnus asks, as you both watch the North Sea through windows that are thick enough to withstand wave impacts that would destroy most buildings. Another rotation. That would mean another 14 days of working in conditions that would shut down most industrial operations, operating equipment that's designed to extract petroleum from beneath the ocean floor, regardless of environmental conditions or human casualties. Another 14 days of eating food prepared under conditions that would challenge professional chefs, sleeping in spaces barely larger than coffins, working shifts that would be illegal in most industries. Not sure yet, you reply, which is the most honest answer you can give, without admitting that you're beginning to understand why the average career length for oil rig workers is measured in months rather than years. Your 6th day begins with news that the crew rotation helicopter will arrive in the afternoon, providing transportation back to shore for anyone who's completed their rotation or decided that oil rig work isn't compatible with their life expectancy goals. The helicopter will also bring replacement crew members who haven't yet discovered exactly how many ways there are to die while extracting petroleum from beneath one of the most hostile bodies of water on Earth. Anyone going home today? Bill asks during the morning safety briefing, knowing that some crew members will choose to return to shore rather than extend their assignments on an oil rig that operates under conditions that would make safety inspectors have nervous breakdowns. Several crew members indicate that they're ready to return to shore, including Tommy, who's been preparing food under conditions that would challenge professional chefs for longer than anyone can remember. Tommy's replacement will be someone who hopefully learned cooking from sources other than technical manuals written by engineers who had never actually seen food before. Your morning assignment is helping with final equipment maintenance before new crew members arrive and have to learn how to operate machinery that's been modified beyond manufacturer specifications using improvised techniques and spare parts that weren't designed for the applications they're serving. New guys need to understand that nothing on this rig operates exactly according to manufacturer specifications. Pete explains, as you both examine equipment that's functioning successfully despite being repaired using techniques that would void every warranty ever written. Everything's been modified, adapted, or improvised to handle operating conditions that exceed all engineering assumptions. Everything's been modified, adapted, or improvised. That's the reality of oil rig maintenance under extreme operating conditions. Equipment that was designed to operate in controlled industrial environments has to be constantly modified to handle environmental conditions that would destroy most machinery and operating loads that exceed all design specifications. How do new crew members learn to work with modified equipment, you ask? Realizing that equipment modifications that seem routine after 6 days of oil rig work would probably seem terrifying to people who are accustomed to operating machinery that functions according to manufacturer specifications. Same way you learned, Pete replies. Experienced crew members show them how things actually work, as opposed to how the instruction manuals say they should work. Most people adapt pretty quickly, assuming they don't get killed during the learning process. Assuming they don't get killed during the learning process, that's the qualification that applies to most aspects of oil rig work. Most people can learn to operate equipment that's designed to extract petroleum from beneath the ocean floor, assuming they don't get killed by the equipment while they're learning to operate it. The equipment maintenance check reveals that most systems are operating within acceptable parameters, despite being subjected to environmental conditions that would destroy most industrial machinery and operating loads that exceed all design specifications. The improvised repairs and modified components are holding up under operating conditions that would void every warranty ever written. Primary mud pumps running smooth, Pete observes, examining equipment that's operating successfully on a bearing that was modified using cutting torches and installed using techniques that would horrify the engineers who designed the original equipment. Temperatures stable, no unusual vibration. No unusual vibration. That's still the standard for successful oil rig equipment maintenance. Not optimal performance, not factory specification operation, just the absence of obvious signs of impending catastrophic failure while operating under conditions that exceed all engineering assumptions. Lunch features fresh food that continues to taste like actual food rather than industrial lubricants mixed with salt water, which represents a dramatic improvement in oil rig dining quality. The improvement is temporary, because Tommy's replacement might not have the same culinary skills, but temporary improvements in oil rig life are better than no improvements at all. Going to miss this place? Eric asks, knowing that some people develop an appreciation for oil rig life, despite working conditions that would shut down most industrial operations. Parts of it, you reply, which is true if you define parts of it as the parts that didn't involve constant risk of death by crushing, explosion, fire, drowning, or exposure to environmental conditions that would kill most people within minutes. The helicopter arrives in the afternoon, landing on the platform with the grace of professional piloting performed under conditions that would ground most aircraft. The aircraft brings replacement crew members who haven't yet discovered exactly how many ways oil rig work can violate basic principles of industrial safety, and it will take away crew members who've completed their rotations or decided that their life expectancy goals aren't compatible with oil rig work. Transport's here, Bill announces, as the helicopter settles onto the landing platform with rotor noise that drowns out even the constant sound of drilling equipment operating at maximum capacity. Anyone going home? Get your gear together. Your gear consists of personal items that have been subjected to 6 days of environmental conditions that would destroy most consumer products. Clothing that's been soaked with salt water spray and dried with industrial heating systems. Personal electronics that have somehow survived constant vibration and temperature fluctuations that would damage most equipment. Books that have been read by the light of industrial illumination systems while surrounded by the constant noise of machinery operating beyond its design specifications. Decided to go home? Magnus asks, as you pack belongings that represent your connection to a world where buildings don't move constantly and work doesn't routinely risk the lives of everyone involved. Yeah. You reply, realizing that 6 days of oil rig work has taught you more about industrial equipment, extreme weather conditions, and human endurance than you would have learned in years of conventional employment. Think I've learned enough about oil rig life. The helicopter loading process requires careful coordination to prevent people or equipment from being blown off the platform by rotor wash that's strong enough to relocate objects that aren't properly secured. Everyone moves with the systematic precision of people who understand that helicopter operations on oil rigs involve risks that don't exist in normal aviation. Safe flight, Red tells you, as you prepare to board aircraft that will transport you away from an oil rig that operates under conditions that would shut down most industrial facilities. Hope you learned something useful. You learned something useful. You learned that oil rig work requires skills that most people don't possess, performed under conditions that most people wouldn't survive, for wages that compensate for the constant risk of death by industrial accident or extreme weather. You learned that extracting petroleum from beneath the ocean floor involves systematic coordination between people operating equipment that could kill them instantly if anyone makes a mistake. The helicopter departure provides a perspective on the oil rig that you couldn't get while working on the platform. From the air, the rig looks like a small industrial facility surrounded by ocean that stretches to the horizon in every direction. A tiny outpost of human technology surrounded by natural forces that could destroy it without effort, operated by people who've somehow learned to work productively under conditions that would terrify most engineers. The flight back to shore takes 45 minutes of traveling over ocean that's still rough enough to make the helicopter ride feel like an amusement park attraction operated by someone with questionable mechanical skills. But compared to working on an oil rig during North Sea winter storms, helicopter flight feels remarkably stable and comfortable. Shore looks impossibly solid and permanent, after 6 days of living on a platform that moved constantly in response to oceanic forces. Buildings that are connected to foundations that don't move. Roads that stay in the same location from day to day. Parking lots that don't tilt back and forth depending on weather conditions. The helicopter lands at an airport that seems almost impossibly luxurious compared to oil rig facilities. buildings with heating systems that maintain consistent temperatures, lighting that doesn't flicker when equipment cycles on and off, food service that's operated by people who learned cooking from culinary schools rather than from technical manuals written by engineers. "How was it?" asks the transportation coordinator who processes crew members returning from oil rig assignments. She's probably asked this question thousands of times to people who've worked under conditions that would shut down most industrial operations. "Educational," you reply, which is probably the most accurate single-word description of oil rig work that doesn't mention the constant possibility of death by industrial accident or extreme weather conditions. The transportation back to normal civilization involves traveling through landscapes that seem impossibly stable and comfortable compared to oil rig environments. Towns where buildings don't move constantly. Roads that don't require structural modifications to prevent them from being destroyed by weather. People who work in conditions that don't routinely risk their lives for petroleum extraction. You spend the journey trying to process everything you've experienced during 6 days of working on a North Sea oil rig during winter storm conditions. The systematic coordination required to operate equipment that could kill everyone if anyone makes a mistake. The constant noise of machinery operating beyond its design specifications, the perpetual motion of a platform surrounded by oceanic forces that could destroy it without effort. Your family greets you at home with questions about oil rig work that are impossible to answer without describing experiences that would make them think you'd joined some kind of industrial death cult. How do you explain working in weather conditions that would shut down entire cities? How do you describe operating equipment that's designed to extract petroleum from beneath the ocean floor, regardless of safety considerations? "How was the work?" your sister asks, probably expecting stories about routine industrial employment rather than descriptions of survival under conditions that would make Arctic explorers request transfers to more comfortable assignments. "Challenging," you reply, which is accurate if you define challenging as constantly life-threatening but somehow educational. Learned a lot about industrial equipment and weather conditions. Your first night back home feels strange after 6 days of sleeping, in a bunk barely wider than a coffin while surrounded by the constant noise of machinery operating at maximum capacity. Your bed doesn't move constantly in response to external forces. Your room doesn't vibrate from equipment operating beyond its design specifications. The silence is almost unsettling after 6 days of constant industrial noise. You lie awake thinking about the people who are still working on the oil rig, operating equipment that could kill them instantly if they make a single mistake, under weather conditions that would shut down most human activities. Magnus, sleeping in his coffin-sized bunk while the entire rig rocks back and forth. Red, monitoring drilling operations that involve pressures high enough to launch human bodies into orbit. Pete, maintaining equipment that's been modified beyond manufacturer specifications using improvised techniques. The next morning, you wake up to silence that seems impossible after 6 days of constant machinery noise. No alarm that sounds like an air raid siren. No immediate need to operate equipment that could cause explosions if mishandled. No weather conditions that would make normal human activities impossible. Your breakfast tastes like food that was prepared by people who learned cooking from culinary schools rather than from technical manuals written by engineers. The eggs have a normal texture. The bacon looks like it came from actual animals. The coffee doesn't taste like it was brewed using water that was filtered through industrial lubricants. Different from oil rig food? Your mother asks, probably not realizing that oil rig food is prepared under conditions that would challenge professional chefs, using ingredients that seem designed to test human digestive systems for durability. Very different, you reply, which is accurate without being specific enough to make anyone worry about the dietary challenges of oil rig work. You spend the day readjusting to life in environments that don't move constantly and work that doesn't routinely risk the lives of everyone involved. Buildings that have heating systems maintaining consistent temperatures, equipment that operates according to manufacturer specifications, people who work in conditions that don't require constant vigilance to prevent industrial disasters. But you also spend the day thinking about the oil rig workers who are still extracting petroleum from beneath one of the most hostile bodies of water on Earth. People who've learned to coordinate their actions with precision that would impress professional symphony conductors while operating equipment that could kill them instantly if anyone makes a mistake. People who work under conditions that most people wouldn't survive, for wages that compensate for constant risk of death by industrial accident or extreme weather. The oil continues to flow from beneath the North Sea floor, extracted by people working under conditions that would shut down most industrial operations. Every gallon of petroleum represents hours of human labor, performed under environmental conditions that would terrify most engineers, using equipment that operates beyond its design specifications while being battered by oceanic forces that could destroy it without effort. Your 6 days on a North Sea oil rig taught you that modern civilization depends on people who are willing to work under conditions that most people can't imagine. People who operate equipment designed to extract resources from environments that are actively hostile to human life. People who coordinate their actions with systematic precision while surrounded by forces that could kill them without warning. The oil rig continues its operations, drilling through rock formations that could cause explosions, operated by people working shifts that would be illegal in most industries, under weather conditions that would shut down most human activities. Petroleum extraction continues because modern civilization requires energy sources that can only be obtained by people willing to risk their lives in environments that exist at the absolute limits of human industrial capability. You return to normal work that seems impossibly safe and comfortable compared to oil rig operations, work that doesn't require constant vigilance to prevent industrial disasters, equipment that operates according to manufacturer specifications, environmental conditions that don't routinely threaten human life. But you also carry with you an understanding of what oil extraction actually requires. Not just drilling holes in the ground, but systematic coordination between people operating equipment that could kill them instantly under environmental conditions that would destroy most machinery, for wages that compensate for constant risk of death by industrial accident or extreme weather. The North Sea oil rigs continue their operations, extracting petroleum that powers modern civilization from beneath one of the most hostile bodies of water on Earth. The work is performed by people who've learned skills that most people don't possess, under conditions that most people wouldn't survive, with coordination that would impress professional performers. Every time you use petroleum products, which is essentially every day in modern civilization, you remember the people who extracted that petroleum from beneath the North Sea floor. People working in weather conditions that would shut down entire cities. People operating equipment that's designed to bore holes through the Earth's crust while standing on platforms that are constantly battered by oceanic forces. Your 6 days on a North Sea oil rig gave you a perspective on modern industrial civilization that most people never develop. An understanding of what's actually required to extract the energy sources that power contemporary life. An appreciation for people who work under conditions that exist at the absolute limits of human industrial capability. The oil rig workers continue their systematic extraction of petroleum from beneath hostile ocean environments, coordinating their actions with precision that prevents industrial disasters, operating equipment that functions beyond its design specifications under environmental conditions that would terrify the engineers who designed it. And somewhere in the North Sea, Magnus is probably explaining oil rig operations to another new worker who doesn't yet understand exactly how many ways there are to die while extracting petroleum from beneath one of the most hostile bodies of water on Earth. The cycle continues because modern civilization requires energy sources that can only be obtained by people willing to work under conditions that most people can't imagine. Your brief experience with oil rig work taught you that behind every aspect of modern convenience lies someone working under conditions that most people never consider. People who operate equipment designed to extract resources from environments that are actively hostile to human life. People who coordinate their actions with systematic precision while surrounded by forces that could kill them without warning. The next time you're stuck in traffic, complaining about weather that's merely unpleasant, or dealing with work problems that don't routinely risk your life. You'll remember the oil rig workers who are extracting the petroleum that makes your complaints possible. People working in conditions that would shut down most human activities, operating equipment that could kill them instantly if they make a single mistake, under weather conditions that would make Arctic explorers request transfers to more comfortable assignments. And you'll be grateful for modern conveniences that seem impossibly luxurious compared to oil rig life. Buildings that don't move constantly in response to external forces. Work that doesn't require constant vigilance to prevent industrial disasters. Food that's prepared by people who learned cooking from sources other than technical manuals written by engineers. The North Sea oil rigs continue their operations, extracting petroleum that powers modern civilization from beneath hostile ocean environments. The work continues because someone has to do it, and the people who do it have developed skills and endurance that most people don't possess. They work under conditions that exist at the absolute limits of human industrial capability, coordinating their actions with precision that prevents disasters, operating equipment that functions beyond its design specifications. Your 6 days on a North Sea oil rig taught you that modern civilization is more fragile and more dependent on human courage than most people realize. Every aspect of contemporary life depends on people working under conditions that most people can't imagine, extracting resources from environments that are actively hostile to human life, using equipment that operates at the absolute limits of engineering capability. And tonight, as you fall asleep in a bed that doesn't move constantly, in a room that doesn't vibrate from machinery operating beyond its design specifications, surrounded by silence that seems impossible after 6 days of constant industrial noise, you'll think about the oil rig workers who are still out there, still drilling holes through rock formations that could cause explosions, still operating equipment that could kill them instantly if they make a mistake, still working under weather conditions that would shut down most human activities. Because someone has to extract the petroleum that powers modern civilization. And that someone turns out to be people with skills and endurance that most of us don't possess, working under conditions that most of us wouldn't survive, with coordination that would impress professional performers. People who've learned to thrive in environments that exist at the absolute limits of human industrial capability. The oil flows, the civilization continues, and somewhere in the North Sea, another shift is beginning on another oil rig. Another group of people preparing to operate equipment that could kill them instantly, under weather conditions that would terrify most engineers, extracting resources that make modern life possible. And you'll sleep peacefully in your warm, stable, quiet bedroom, grateful for modern conveniences that seem impossibly luxurious compared to oil rig life. Carrying with you an understanding of what modern civilization actually costs, and who pays that price, day after day, shift after shift, in the middle of hostile oceans around the world.